Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining this particular presentation. I think I've shared my screen, but I'm not sure I can see what you can see. So hopefully you can see something that says Augmenting Teaching Excellence with AI. Great. It seems I've got that technology working. Be rather embarrassing if I didn't after that wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. Whenever I hear that kind of thing, I'm not sure I recognize the person being described. So anyway, that's always a bit of a cognitive dissonance there to say, oh, it's me. Okay. Look, I have the fortune to be the director of the centre to which Michelle was so adequately referring before. And in fact, I know how hard it is to follow Michelle, so I'm going to give up on quality. I just have to rely on jokes. But anyway, what I'm also presenting here is on behalf of two other academics from RMIT, Alex Koutsakos and Tim Wiley, and of course Angela and myself. Have really just put together the presentation based on the work of these two great academics. I think one thing I probably should say is, as the director of the STEM Centre for Digital Innovation, when it comes to things like AI, chat GPT, mixed reality, who do they come to? They come to myself and Michelle and Ian Peake and Jack Belcher, our technical people. And I think one of the things I think is great about RMIT is having this vision to invest in a centre like this, which, if you can read all the mission spec there, if you like, about the STEM college age and about world-leading practice in STEM teaching through digital innovation. But I like to sum it up as being the envelope's worst nightmare because we're always pushing them around. And I think that probably sums up better than anything the kind of thing we're doing. We say we take new technologies of various different sorts, including chat GPT and various other things, and say, all right, what can we do with this tool? So there's very much in our bailiwick to pick up, experiment, and run with these things. Therefore, it'd be a bit embarrassing if we tried to do something like ban chat GPT or other kind of things that you might have heard of. So I think that's very much in our bailiwick, as in Michelle's, myself, and others, about how we work with these things. Now, I think the other thing that's worth saying, as someone who in some ways has been a researcher in AI over a number of years, there's a lot of hype about chat GPT and AI, which you probably subdivide into the, oh no, it's the apocalypse, what we've done is going to burn, everything's going to hell, we're all going there in a handbasket, everything's wrecked, which of course is unrealistic. It does create some challenges, but I think the apocalyptic vision is something, well, let's save that for the movies. That's probably not the reality of what we're looking at. There's also a sense that some people see perhaps the opposite. It's, oh, it's paradise. Suddenly we've got general intelligence. Everything's solved. We won't have to work. And the most strenuous thing you might have to do is feed your pet unicorn. Well, that's probably equally diluted in terms of where AI is going to take us. The reality, of course, is somewhere in between. And, of course, finding exactly where that somewhere is really what Michelle and I and others are charged with. I guess we're probably preaching to the choir here, let alone possibly some of the popes and people like Sally. But it's really about co-design. In terms of the staff have obviously got lots of challenges for these new technologies, but the students do too. And I think one of the things we'll talk about is the students were as not, if not more fearful of things like chat GPT than the staff were. So it's also a matter of educating students in that sense about the tool and how it works, and really seeing these as tools from which we can then, within some co-design process, get to real and fascinating places. And I hope all of these are real. These are all photographs from the internet, so I assume that they're real. But the point is that they're fascinating, but they're actually places you can visit. At least I'm told you can. So that's really where we want to ground things in the reality, what we can do with advanced technology, rather than talking about magic or demonic presence or something like that. So to get on to the real work of the two academics involved, one of these was Alex Koutsakos. Now, Alex is an experienced engineer, and she, I should point out, so being an experienced engineer is not that common, unfortunately. I hope it will be less uncommon in future. But Alex is someone I've known fairly well, and he can probably talk with the grayness in the beard, where neither of us are exactly young. She's an experienced educator in engineering. I won't say she's seen it all, but she's certainly seen a lot in her time in teaching students. And one of the classic things she does in one of her courses with a few hundred students in materials engineering is get them to write an essay. They choose a particular topic, they do some research, they filter it, they analyze, and they come up with synthesized results, etc. And of course, the conventional wisdom is that writing an essay in the ChatGPT area is a total waste of time because ChatGPT can just write the essay. So how could you possibly know whether the student did the original work or not, or what they understand? Alex knows that very well. But rather than say, oh my God, I've got to rip up this essay, I've got to throw away all those great learning outcomes that come with that process, I've got to somehow just give up and start again, she actually sat down and thought, well, actually, all this really does is create some extra power for the students. So rather than replace the essay, she augmented it, if you like, with the search for ChatGPT. So in addition to producing the essay, the students had this additional criterion about demonstrating their search strategy. So how did you find the information? What did you do? So if you like, it's a classic, not just the artifact, but also the process idea, but specifically about how did you find the information? So what questions, what prompts did you use? How did you help them refine them? And of course, the students quickly learn you don't just magically put in one prompt to Chat GPT and suddenly everything spits out perfectly exactly as you would without any perfection. So there's often an iterative process of put in a prompt, you get some output, you have a look at that and think, no, that's not quite right. I need to refine that. I'll take this bit, it needs to be shorter, it needs to be more precise, less about this, etc. So having that education and the iterations necessary to use the AI in the best way was an important part of that. So as a result, students all needed some additional support to say, this is how you work with it. And Alex, perhaps surprisingly, found a lot of times she was explaining things like Boolean search queries, how to use and or and not to be more precise about the information you need. And that might be somewhat surprising, but it did work quite well. Those who are able to master that were able to use the tool much more efficiently and hence have a better way of finding information in general. So I think that really much sums up a great approach to it. It's not a matter of throwing out the essay because ChatGPT could write it. It's a matter of saying, how do you leverage this tool to give the students a tool that they can use to perhaps do a more complete or a more sophisticated essay than they could otherwise. The other outcome, I think, that perhaps a little surprise to start with was that students needed support to look at the advantages and disadvantages of AI. And having had Alex talk about this, there's often a lot of students had very different attitudes. Some were quite fearful. Oh my God, this AI stuff is Terminator kind of things. I don't want to fiddle with it. Others were quite dismissive. Oh, stupid AI. Why do we have to use this, etc. Others just didn't know, hadn't had any experience, weren't really sure, wasn't really their thing. Perhaps needed a bit of legitimacy to say, yeah, it's legitimate to use this. It's not cheating. It's okay, but you can actually use this and productively be a good citizen and still use AI without feeling you're doing something underhand. So there's quite a lot of diverse attitudes from the students as well that needed that sort of coaching through the processes as well as the advantages and disadvantages of AI. And I think, like a lot of us, the more you hear about ChatGPT, the more it seems like advanced technology rather than magic, in a sense that it's a tool rather than something that reads your mind or something like that. Remarkably, and perhaps somewhat contradictorily, Alex says, well, in her experience, which is, I said, not inconsiderable, students enjoyed the assignment more and there were fewer cases of plagiarism. I'll say those last few words again. There were fewer cases of plagiarism by using ChatGPT. And that's something that I think is quite remarkable and testament to the way in which this has been rethought rather than thrown out and replaced with something otherwhere else. So look, Alex's take home is perhaps a little bit mother and apple pie stuff about, yeah, it's got to be the clear link between learning outcomes and assessment, but I suppose it's really thinking through that clearly to say, I'm not just going to throw out the essay because ChatGPT could generate it. How could I augment the writing of that essay to get better essays and better student experience by using ChatGPT? So even though the link between learning outcomes and assessment probably is old news to a lot of people here, it's something I think is really refreshed and perhaps emphasised in this particular exercise. The other case I want to talk about is a colleague of mine in the School of Community Technologies named Timothy Wiley. Now, Timothy's someone who's got a first-year programming course that has something like 1,100 students across the year. So like a lot of courses, it's pretty large, and there's a number of issues within that in general. The one we're going to focus on here is assessment. In particular, part of the process of doing this course, the students have to complete 4, well, they're called portfolios, but they're really small assignments, I suppose, that contain both text and image. And when I say text, it's probably 50 to 100 word answers to questions like, what are the properties that a relation in a database system must follow? So sorry for non-computer scientists, that might sound like gibberish, but think 50 to 100 word pointed answer covering perhaps 1 or 2 different points about, here's the important properties. Here's a diagram to represent some visual representation of a life cycle or things like that. So there's usually 1, perhaps 2 key points they're looking for in worded English of up to 100 words. Now, the traditional way to mark this would have been human marking, 5 minutes per submission, not that much really, but times about 1,000, it becomes a non-trivial exercise. Now, to some extent, that just comes to the territory of a class like 1,000 students. But one issue that Tim was noticing was a lot of potential inconsistency between the markers. Because you have a small army of these markers, it takes a general to organise a small army, and you've got to make sure almost religiously or obsessively that everyone's doing exactly the same thing. Otherwise, you might get some disparity. Moreover, there was this other issue that occasionally, when you've got two key points you're looking for, then people might miss one. So in that sense, it was perhaps a little not so much inconsistent, it's just that people admitted, oh, I didn't realise they said that in this way, and that kind of thing. So enter a thing called SageGrader. And I think one of the things that I'd like to emphasize that AI is much more than just ChatGPT or even just generative AI. There's a lot of other AI out there. And in fact, as someone who's got an interest in, as in the CDI, and looking at these things, I know there's companies who try to sell you auto-grading solutions. So Tim actually worked with one that's founded by a local and a former RMIT staff member called SageGrader to mitigate this issue with inconsistency when you have these fairly large numbers. Remember, there's 4 lots of these portfolios, so they do this marking 4 times a semester. Now, in this case, what the auto assistance was, and I stress assistance, not replacement. This is AI-assisted marking, not replacing marking with AI. The first 100 or so portfolios were marked in the traditional manner by hand. So if you like, you have a training set. Here's a set that I can use the AI to train. The rest had a grade proposed by the system. So we mark only about 10% of that total, and the rest get an auto-suggested grade. That, of course, is not the end of it. The staff have to review it, just as with most things with AI. The AI might help you, but you are going to be responsible at the end of the day. The student's going to come looking for you and say, hey, I had the similar answer to my friend, and that person got more marks than I did. Funnily enough, you don't get the complaint the other way. But anyway, there's an issue of how do you make sure that you're consistent across those. So the humans checked them all and found that the suggested grades were somewhere between 85 and 95% accurate. And I think that percentage tended to go up as they got more familiarity with the tool and how it worked and so forth. In terms of time, it wasn't worse, and it might have saved a little, but didn't save a lot. But I think the thing that was really important was that it got a much more increase in consistency across the markers, and if you like, a kind of evidence for consistency. If we said previously, well, the human marking was consistent, well, how would you know? I'm sure it may well be true, but it's very hard to provide concrete evidence of it. With a tool like this, you could actually randomly compare. Look, here's your mark, here's someone else's, let's have a look, etc. So there may be a potential in future to save time this way, but it certainly provided an increase in consistency and hence a better student experience than relying on purely human use alone. So that's another thing. It's not ChatGPT, but it is an interesting use of AI. And to be honest, I think in some sense, this is the kind of thing that would be quite applicable in a wide variety of courses. Certainly we're seeing at RMIT, we're getting more and more courses. We've actually got another course that's got something like 2,000 students in it and a few others of similar ilk. So when you've got these, I dare say, not quite mega courses in the way that we all used to talk about MOOCs about 10 years ago, but certainly we're getting these courses with thousands, plural, of students in them that having some sort of automatic or AI-assisted marking clearly is going to be an important pragmatic thing, not just to save staff time and sanity, but also to improve the experience for students in terms of consistency of feedback and possibly also in terms of speed of feedback and things like that. So I think this is an interesting area that we might get more and more of as time goes on. As Michelle and others well know, I can go on forever. So let me just conclude with perhaps some obvious statements again that AI is not magic. It's not to be feared. It's a tool. So it's more like the latter rather than the former in this kind of thing if you're looking at transport. But it's a great time to get involved, and there's a lot of interesting futures here. And these two examples from these Alex and Tim have shown what's possible. And I expect if we came back in a year or two's time, they both would have gone a lot further with both of these ideas. So thank you very much for attention. I think I'll have to leave it there.